The storm rages, violent winds howling through the trees, ripping at the earth and slamming against the windows of the tiny town. Inside her house, Sarah watches the rain streak against the glass, a rising panic clenching her chest. She holds her phone to her ear, hearing nothing but the static of an abandoned call. The world outside is a blur of cold, violent motion. But as her eyes scan the dark horizon, a flash of movement catches her attention. A dark shape, small and struggling, at the edge of the woods. For a moment she wonders if it's the storm playing tricks on her. But no, there it is again. Her heart skips a beat. A dog, alone, injured. She doesn't hesitate. Without a second thought, she grabs her coat and steps into the rain-soaked night, leaving the warmth and safety of her home behind. The ground is slippery beneath her boots, the wind cutting through her clothes as she pushes forward. Every step is a battle against the storm. But Sarah doesn't stop. She can hear the faint whimper of the animal as the storm roars around them. Every instinct screams to turn back, to seek shelter, to wait for daylight. But she can't. Not now. Not with that sound, that helplessness calling to her through the chaos. She knows what she has to do, and as she approaches the dog, her breath shaky in the storm, her hand trembling as it reaches down to help, she doesn't realize the full depth of the journey she is about to begin, not just for the dog, but for herself. Show your love, hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The wind howled outside, fierce and wild, clawing at the old windows like some restless animal seeking entry. Inside the house, the storm's fury was muffled, but its presence was felt in the tremor that ran through Sarah's bones. The rain pelted against the glass, a relentless drumming that filled the silence around her. She had always felt a kind of peace in storms. Something about their raw, untamed power spoke to a part of her that was too familiar with chaos. But tonight something was different. The air felt thick, suffocating, like the storm had a purpose that she wasn't yet meant to understand, and it was calling to her. She glanced down at her phone, the screen flashing with a message from her best friend, Emma. Stay safe, please. The storm is bad. Sarah didn't need to be told that. The trees outside were bent nearly double, their branches whipping in every direction as the wind screamed in fury. But what bothered her wasn't the storm itself. It was the unsettling feeling gnawing at her gut. She hadn't been able to shake it for hours. Her gaze moved to the darkened horizon, barely visible through the sheets of rain. For a moment she thought it was a trick of the storm, a shadow in the rain, a figment of her imagination. But no, there it was again, a flicker of movement. Her breath caught in her throat as her heart skipped a beat. A shape, a small, dark form at the edge of the woods. For a moment, she wondered if her mind was playing games with her. The storm, after all, could do strange things to a person's senses. But the shape didn't move like the wind did. It was different, more deliberate, more desperate. Without thinking, without even questioning herself, Sarah grabbed her coat and rushed to the door. She didn't bother with an umbrella. The wind had stolen it from her earlier, and the rain soaked through her clothes within seconds. Her boots squelched against the mud as she pushed through the yard, the wet grass slapping at her legs. The ground was slick beneath her feet, and each step felt like she was sinking deeper into the earth. But she didn't stop. Her heart was pounding, not from fear but from something else, an urgency that she couldn't explain. The shape was clearer now. It was a dog, small, huddled against the base of a fallen tree, its body trembling under the onslaught of the storm. Its fur was matted, soaked through, and its eyes, wide with fear, glinted in the dim light. She stopped in her tracks. The world felt like it had frozen. The storm continued to rage around her, but in that instant there was nothing else. Just the dog. It was hurt. She could see it now, blood dripping from its leg, the dark stain stark against its fur. Her chest tightened, a sudden flood of emotion rising from somewhere deep within her. How long had it been out here? What had happened to it? There was no way she could leave it like this. Not after everything it had been through, but even as her heart ached for it, her mind screamed at her to turn around. It wasn't safe out here, not in this storm. The winds were picking up, and the rain felt like sharp needles against her skin. The dog was small, but how would she ever get it back to safety? How could she help it without putting herself in danger? Every instinct screamed at her to go back inside, to leave the poor animal to its fate. It was the smart choice. But something deeper inside her pushed back against that. Something she couldn't name. Without giving herself a moment to doubt, Sarah forced herself forward. Her heart was racing as she crouched down, her knees sinking into the wet mud. She could feel the cold seep through her clothes, the chill of the storm gnawing at her bones. But it was nothing compared to the weight in her chest. She reached for the dog slowly at first, giving it the chance to pull away if it needed to. Her fingers trembled as they reached out, brushing against its fur. The dog flinched, pulling back with a soft whimper. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was hurt, badly, and terrified. "Hey, it's okay," she whispered, though her voice was barely audible over the roar of the wind. "I'm here to help you." The dog's eyes were wide with panic, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if she had made a mistake. What if it attacked her? What if it had rabies or some other illness? But no, that thought didn't last long. The look in its eyes, wide, pleading lost, told her everything she needed to know. It wasn't thinking about danger. It wasn't worried about what might hurt it. It was just terrified, alone, and vulnerable. She reached out again, this time more firmly. The dog didn't snap at her, but it recoiled, its body rigid with fear. Sarah winced but didn't pull away. Slowly, cautiously, she brought her hand closer, resting it on its back. The dog flinched but didn't pull away. She could feel the tremors running through its body, the shallow breaths it was taking. "I'm not going to hurt you," she murmured, her voice steady now as she gently pressed against its side. It was cold, so cold, but Sarah wasn't going to leave it there. Not now. Not when it needed her. The dog's head turned toward her, its eyes still filled with fear but with something else, too, a glimmer of something that almost looked like trust. She held her breath as she gently lifted it, the animal's fragile body shaking against her. It was a struggle, but she managed to get it into her arms, feeling its weight shift as she stood, the mud sucking at her boots. As she started back toward the house, the rain pounding harder against her, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't expected. Her heart was still racing, but it wasn't fear that drove her anymore. It was determination. She had made a choice, and now there was no going back. She wasn't going to let this dog suffer. And in a strange way, as she trudged through the storm, fighting the wind and the rain, she realized she wasn't just saving the dog. She was saving herself too. The storm raged on, its fury unrelenting, as Sarah carried the dog through the relentless downpour. The rain lashed at her face, the icy sting of it feeling like 1,000 tiny needles. She was aware of her surroundings, the way the trees swayed violently, their branches flailing like they were fighting to hold onto something. Anything, while the wind tore through the air, its shrieking howl drowning out every other sound. But none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered, the only thing that consumed Sarah, was the fragile creature she held in her arms, trembling against her chest. The dog's body was limp but warm, its fur soaked through, a puddle of dark red blood staining her jacket where its injured leg rested. Sarah winced, a pang of guilt flooding her chest. Was it too late? She couldn't bear the thought of it, but she couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. The house, a few hundred yards away, felt like a distant dream, a place of safety that seemed impossibly far in the chaos of the storm. Each step she took was a small victory against the odds, but her body screamed in protest. Her legs were weak, her breath ragged, her arms sore from holding the dog against the wind's force. She couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. The weight of the dog, though light compared to the burden of her thoughts, felt heavier with each passing second. Every time she tried to adjust her grip, the dog whimpered, a soft, pitiful sound that knifed through her. The guilt and helplessness in that sound were almost too much to bear. What if it's too late? What if I don't get it inside in time? Sarah's mind raced, every scenario playing out in her head. The storm didn't seem to care about her worries. The wind shrieked louder, the rain thickened, and yet Sarah pushed on. Her shoes slid on the slick earth, her steps growing more uncertain with each passing minute. The cold seeped through her coat, and her skin felt raw where the rain cut into her, but Sarah didn't notice it. Not really. The only thing she felt was the weight of the dog in her arms, and that sound. That whimpering. It haunted her. The dog's pain seemed to become her own. She stopped for a moment, pressing her back against a large tree for a brief rest. Her breathing was labored, and she closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. The dog was still trembling in her arms, its breath shallow, its tiny body shuddering with every gust of wind. She adjusted her grip, trying not to jar it too much. But as she did, the dog whimpered louder, snapping its teeth at her in panic. The dog's fear was palpable, a reflection of its struggle to survive. Sarah understood that fear. She felt it too. It wasn't just the storm. It was the pain of being lost, of not knowing if help would come, of wondering whether you would make it through the night. It was the same fear that gnawed at her own soul every day, the fear of never being enough, of never being able to protect herself from the world around her. She had carried that fear for years, a weight she couldn't put down. And now this small dog, this creature who had been abandoned, left to die in the storm, was showing her what that fear truly felt like. With a soft sigh, Sarah adjusted her grip once more. "It's okay," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I'm here. I'm not going to let go. Not now. Not ever." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. She didn't know if she could make it back. She didn't know if she could get them both to safety. But she would try. She had to try. The dog whimpered again, its body going limp for a moment, and Sarah's heart stuttered in her chest. Was it losing consciousness? Was it too weak to keep going? The thought hit her like a punch in the gut, but she refused to let it break her. She refused to let the dog down. Not after everything it had been through. She pushed herself back up from the tree, lifting the dog carefully as she continued her journey toward the house. Each step was an agonizing decision. Should she run? Should she slow down to save her energy? She didn't know, but the dog's shallow breathing kept her moving. The storm seemed to laugh at her resolve, pushing harder against her, as if daring her to turn back. The wind cut at her face, stinging her skin with its bite, and her legs began to tremble with exhaustion. She could hear the dog's faint breathing, each rasp a reminder of how fragile life was, how easily it could slip away. The feeling of helplessness pressed down on her chest, but she kept walking, her steps slow and deliberate. She couldn't stop. She couldn't let the storm win. The house finally came into view, a dark silhouette against the night sky, its windows glowing with warmth and safety. Sarah's heart gave a relieved thud in her chest. She was almost there. Almost. But the storm wasn't done with her yet. The wind howled with renewed fury, and a sharp gust slammed against her, nearly knocking her off balance. She stumbled, her grip on the dog faltering, but she caught herself before she fell, her breath catching in her throat. Just a little longer, she muttered to herself, more for her own comfort than the dog's. With all the strength she had left, she staggered toward the house. The door was just ahead, a beacon of warmth in the chaos of the storm. She could see the light through the window, and the thought of safety, of shelter, made her stomach twist. But even as she moved closer, she couldn't shake the nagging thought that the dog was growing weaker in her arms. When she finally reached the door, she paused for just a moment, letting the relief wash over her. She knocked frantically, desperate to get inside, her hands trembling, her fingers slick with rain. The door opened, and Sarah was greeted by the warmth of the house, the dry air hitting her like a wave of relief. But the relief was short-lived. The dog in her arms whimpered again, and Sarah looked down in panic. It was still breathing, but its breaths were slow and shallow. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't give up now." Inside the warmth of the house, the world outside seemed to disappear. The storm's howling fury was muted, replaced by the soft hum of the heater and the quiet of the room. Sarah sat on the floor, her back pressed against the wall, the dog cradled gently in her arms. Her hands shook as she wiped away the rain from its fur, but she couldn't quite bring herself to relax. Her breath still came in sharp, quick gasps as she gazed down at the small creature in her lap. The dog's once dark fur was now streaked with mud and water, and blood had begun to congeal around its wound. Its eyes were closed, but its breathing was slow and steady, though still labored. Sarah ran her fingers through its matted fur, the softness of it contrasting with the jagged pain she could feel in her own chest. The storm outside still raged, but inside the house, time felt like it had slowed down, each second stretching out endlessly. She couldn't take her eyes off the dog, her focus fixed entirely on its fragile form. The silence between them was thick, heavy, as if both of them were waiting for something to happen. The dog's body trembled under her hands, not from the cold, but from the pain it still endured. Sarah's fingers grazed the wound on its leg, and she winced, remembering how she had first found it, shaking in the storm, barely able to move, its eyes wide with terror. She had seen that same fear in herself before, had felt that same hopelessness when life felt like it had turned its back on her. The dog was lost in its pain, and yet, so was she, lost in a world that felt so often cruel and unforgiving. But now, as she held the dog in her lap, the bond that had formed between them was undeniable. It was a bond forged not in words, but in shared silence, in the understanding that both of them had been broken by the world around them, and yet, here they were, surviving. She wasn't sure what had drawn her to the dog that night. Was it fate, compassion, or something deeper? Something that connected them more than just a shared experience of suffering. The dog shifted slightly, letting out a soft whimper, and Sarah gently adjusted her hold on it, being careful not to hurt it more. The warmth of the house seeped into her clothes, but it did little to ease the turmoil inside her. The storm had battered her body, but it was the emotional storm that had torn her apart. All those years of feeling disconnected, of never quite fitting in, of wondering if anyone would ever truly see her, had led to a kind of numbness. But in this moment, with the dog in her arms, that numbness began to melt away. The dog had shown her something. In its vulnerability, it had given her permission to be vulnerable too. Her mind wandered back to the storm, to the panic she had felt when she first saw the dog in the rain, the fear that had clawed at her insides, the overwhelming doubt. But she had pushed past it. She had stepped into the storm without thinking of the consequences, driven by something she couldn't explain. And now she was here in the safety of her own home, holding this small, injured creature that had somehow made it through the storm just like her. The dog's eyes fluttered open slowly, and Sarah froze, her heart leaping in her chest. She didn't want to frighten it, didn't want to make it feel more vulnerable than it already did. She kept her voice soft, almost a whisper. "It's okay," she said again, though this time it wasn't just for the dog. It was for herself too. "You're safe now." The dog blinked up at her, its eyes cloudy but focused, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw something in its gaze, something that felt familiar. It wasn't the terror she had first seen. It wasn't the fear of the unknown. It was something else, a flicker of trust, of recognition. And with that recognition, something shifted in Sarah too. She wasn't just helping the dog anymore. She was starting to heal herself. As the dog shifted slightly, Sarah noticed a faint tremor in its legs. It wasn't just cold. It was exhaustion. She reached for the blanket nearby, wrapping it gently around the dog's small frame. The dog didn't resist, it simply lay there, its eyes closed once again. Sarah didn't want to leave its side, not now. She wanted to stay with it, protect it, make sure it knew it wasn't alone. The quiet of the house was a balm to the chaos of the storm outside. But as Sarah sat there, she began to realize that the storm had never just been the one outside. It had always been inside her too. The quiet desperation, the unspoken pain, the fear of being alone in a world that had always felt too loud. And now, in this moment of calm, she was starting to face it. She was starting to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. A connection. As the dog's breathing slowed, Sarah's thoughts drifted to her own past. She had always been the quiet one, the observer. She had never quite belonged in her family, in her friendships, in her own life. It was as if she had always been standing on the outside, looking in. The pain of isolation had always been a constant companion, even when she didn't realize it. She had built walls around herself, thick walls of emotional armor, afraid that if she let anyone in, they would leave. But now, holding this injured dog in her lap, she began to question everything. Maybe it wasn't about building walls. Maybe it was about breaking them down. allowing herself to be seen, to be heard, to trust. Maybe the dog wasn't the only one in need of rescue. She leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against the dog's fur, closing her eyes. In that moment, the world felt different. The storm outside, the pain she had carried for so long, it all seemed less significant in the face of something more important, the possibility of healing, the possibility of change. The dog shifted again, nuzzling into her lap, seeking warmth, comfort. Sarah's heart softened, her breath slowing. She didn't know what the future held for them. She didn't know if the dog would fully recover, or if her own healing process would take days, months, or years. But in this quiet moment, with the storm still raging outside, she realized something. They were both survivors. And as long as they had each other, there was a chance to rebuild, to trust, to grow. The dog's small, fragile body pressed against hers, and Sarah realized that this was the beginning, not just of the dog's recovery, but of her own. Together they would heal. Together, they would face whatever came next, with no promises, but with the shared strength of knowing they weren't alone anymore. The storm outside had begun to quiet, but the heavy weight of exhaustion still clung to Sarah's shoulders. Her muscles ached from the long night, from the hours she had spent running through the wind and rain, trying to save something that felt as fragile as herself. The house, now warm and dry, provided her with a small reprieve, but her mind was still racing, her thoughts still tangled with fear and uncertainty. She couldn't stop thinking about the dog, the fragile, broken creature that now lay resting beside her, its small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that somehow comforted her. Sarah knew she couldn't stay in this moment forever, though. She had to get the dog to the vet. It was the only logical thing to do. She couldn't let this poor animal suffer any longer, especially now that it had started to show signs of trust, of healing. But the idea of venturing back into the storm, of braving the world outside again, made her chest tighten. The warmth of the house was like a cocoon, offering safety, a temporary shield against the chaos that raged beyond the walls. But the reality was unavoidable. The dog needed help, and Sarah knew she had to be strong enough to face whatever came next. The first rays of light were just beginning to filter through the blinds, casting long, soft shadows across the room. The storm had subsided, but the remnants of its fury still lingered. Dark, heavy clouds hanging low in the sky, the ground still slick and muddy. Sarah stood up, her legs weak from sitting on the cold floor for so long. She stretched, the muscles in her arms aching as she glanced down at the dog, now awake, its eyes opening slowly to meet hers. Its gaze was less frantic than before, more trusting, more peaceful. For the first time since she had found it, the dog seemed calm, serene, even. Sarah knelt beside it, reaching out to gently stroke its fur. The dog didn't pull away this time. Instead, it leaned into her touch, nuzzling against her hand with a quiet sigh. A sense of relief washed over Sarah, but it was quickly replaced by the reality that the journey wasn't over. She still had to get the dog to the vet. The thought of navigating the streets, of walking out into the aftermath of the storm, filled Sarah with dread. The storm had passed, but it had left behind a world that felt alien, like a different version of everything she had known. The streets would be flooded, the wind would still be unpredictable, and the dog? She hesitated, wondering if the dog was even strong enough to make it. It had already gone through so much. She didn't want to push it further than it could handle. But then she looked down at the dog again, small, fragile, but alive. It had survived this far, and so had she. There was something in that quiet resilience, that shared survival, that made her feel like she had to keep going. They had made it through the storm together, and now she wasn't about to leave it behind. With a deep breath, Sarah stood up. She grabbed her coat from the back of the chair and pulled it on, her movements slow but steady. Her fingers still trembled from the cold, but there was a new determination in her chest. She would not fail the dog now, not after everything it had been through. The house seemed too quiet as she moved to the door, opening it slowly, careful not to disturb the calm they had found inside. The world outside had been reshaped by the storm. The streets were unrecognizable, the usual paths submerged in deep puddles, the sidewalks strewn with debris. Sarah glanced down at the dog, now resting quietly in her arms. It didn't struggle, didn't make a sound. It simply leaned into her chest, exhausted but calm. Sarah stepped outside, feeling the cold air rush in as soon as she opened the door. The world felt different in the light of the morning. The sun was trying to peek through the clouds, but the remnants of the storm hung heavy in the air, as though nature itself was waiting for something. The journey ahead felt monumental. The road to the vet's office wasn't far, but it might as well have been miles. The streets were flooded in places, and there was no way to walk around the deep puddles without getting soaked. But Sarah couldn't stop. She had come this far, and she wouldn't let the storm, or anything else, stop her now. Each step felt like a small victory. The dog's weight was light in her arms, but the burden of uncertainty, of knowing if she was doing the right thing, of wondering if the storm would come again, was heavy. She focused on the road ahead, on putting one foot in front of the other. The dog's quiet breathing, rhythmic and steady, was the only sound that kept her grounded. She passed the small convenience store on the corner, now dark and abandoned, its windows cracked by the storm. There were no cars on the road, no people out walking. The world felt empty, abandoned, and for a moment Sarah wondered if the world outside was even real. Had it really been so fierce? Had she really just stepped out of the chaos to come here, to the quiet of the vet's office? Finally, she reached the building. A small, modest clinic. The kind that felt like home when you needed it most. She could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights through the door, the soft rustling of papers, the faint murmur of a voice inside. Her fingers trembled again as she reached for the handle. She glanced down at the dog, its head resting gently against her chest, and then she stepped inside. The warmth of the clinic hit her immediately, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with something else, something comforting. She approached the receptionist, who looked up from her desk, her eyes wide in surprise as she saw the dog in Sarah's arms. "I need help," Sarah said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to steady it. "This dog, it's been through the storm. It needs help." The receptionist quickly stood, rushing over to them. "Let's get him to the back," she said gently. "We'll take care of him." As Sarah followed the woman into the back, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. They were in the right place. The dog would be okay. And in that moment, Sarah realized that this wasn't just about the dog's survival. It was about hers too. She had made it through the storm. She had survived. And now, just as the dog would heal, so would she. The journey wasn't over, but she had crossed a threshold. There was no going back, only forward. The sterile, quiet hum of the vet's office wrapped around Sarah like a cocoon. The smells of antiseptic, clean linen, and fresh paper had been a comfort to her initially. But now, with the soft lighting and the calm energy in the air, the reality of what had just transpired, the storm, the journey, the shared vulnerability between her and the dog, began to settle in her chest like a quiet storm of its own. The dog had been whisked away to a back room the moment they entered, its fragile body cradled by the hands of the vet tech, who had immediately taken charge. Sarah had been left in the waiting area, sitting in an uncomfortable chair, trying to steady her breathing. The dog, still so small and broken, had been the only thing she could focus on. It had fought so hard, and so had she. Now, as she sat alone, the weight of the last several hours slowly began to sink in. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had been holding back, how much fear and uncertainty had taken hold of her heart in those brief, terrifying moments of the storm. It wasn't just about saving the dog anymore. It was about facing the broken parts of herself she had buried deep within her. The loneliness, the pain, the feeling of being lost in a world that often didn't make sense. As Sarah shifted in the chair, the door to the back room opened, and the vet stepped out, his face calm but serious. Her heart skipped a beat. "Was the dog okay?" "Is the dog?" she asked, her voice catching in her throat, but she couldn't finish the sentence. The vet gave a reassuring smile. "It's going to be all right. It's a bad injury, but we've cleaned it up. We're going to monitor it for a few hours to be sure, but I think it's going to make it." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "You did the right thing by bringing it in. It was touch, and go for a while, but it's tough. It'll be okay. Relief flooded Sarah's body, so overwhelming that her knees went weak beneath her. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding, and a soft laugh escaped her lips. "I didn't know if it would make it," she admitted, her voice shaking now. "I wasn't sure if I could get it here in time." The vet nodded, his expression understanding. "Sometimes, getting them to safety is half the battle. You saved it. Don't forget that." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, the weight of everything she had been holding back breaking free. She wasn't just relieved about the dog's survival. She was relieved for herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had done something that mattered. The bond she had shared with the dog, the trust that had grown between them in the storm, the healing they had given each other in the midst of chaos, was more than just a rescue. It was a revelation. The vet's voice brought her back to the present. "We'll need to keep it here for a bit longer, just to be sure. You're welcome to stay, but it's going to need some rest, so we don't want to overwhelm it." Sarah nodded, not wanting to press for more answers. Instead, she chose to sit there, in that quiet space, letting the last few hours settle over her. She could feel her body beginning to unwind, the adrenaline from the storm finally ebbing away. Her muscles ached from the exertion, but the weight in her chest had lessened. It was almost as if she had crossed a threshold, not just in helping the dog, but in helping herself. She wasn't alone in this world. Not anymore. The vet returned a few moments later and placed a soft blanket over Sarah's shoulders as he led her toward the back room where the dog lay. "It's still groggy, but it's stable. If you want to see it now, we can let you in for a bit." Sarah followed him into the small room, her heart fluttering in her chest. The dog was curled up on the examination table, a soft blanket draped over its body. Its eyes were half open, and it blinked slowly at Sarah as she approached, a faint wag of its tail the only movement. Sarah knelt beside the table, gently reaching out to touch the dog's head. It nuzzled into her hand weakly. Its body still fragile, but its spirit was stronger than ever. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You made it. You're okay." The dog's eyes met hers, and for a moment everything else disappeared. It wasn't just a dog anymore. It was a companion, a survivor, a creature that had fought through the storm just as she had. There was a bond between them now, one that couldn't be broken. Sarah gently stroked the dog's fur, marveling at the way it had survived, how it had clung to life in the face of such despair. In that moment, she realized something important. They weren't just healing each other physically. The journey they had taken together had healed something deeper in her too. A part of her that she didn't even know was broken. The vet stepped back, giving them space, but Sarah barely noticed. She was focused entirely on the dog, on the quiet moment of connection they shared. It was a simple, pure moment, free from the noise and chaos of the world outside. For the first time in so long, Sarah didn't feel like she was waiting for something to change. She didn't feel like she was on the outside looking in. She was right here with the dog in this moment, and that was enough. The door to the back room opened once more, and Sarah turned to see the receptionist standing there with a small smile on her face. "We've got some paperwork for you. I think the dog will be ready to go home soon. We'll check in on it in a day or two, but for now, we're confident that'll make a full recovery." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She took the paperwork and signed the forms, her hands steady now. When she looked down at the dog again, it was resting peacefully, its breathing calm and even. As she left the clinic, walking out into the still overcast morning, Sarah felt a sense of peace that she hadn't expected. The storm had passed, but something else had shifted within her. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first found the dog in the rain. She was stronger now, more capable, and more open to the world around her than she had been in years. The dog was with her now, a reminder of survival, of healing, and of connection. Sarah knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. There would be more storms, more moments of fear and doubt, but she also knew that she wasn't alone anymore. The dog, in its quiet, resilient way, had shown her that. Together, they could face whatever came next. And as they walked through the streets heading home, Sarah felt a quiet sense of hope blooming in her chest. The journey wasn't over. But it was only just beginning.